I'm going to try to be a little bit more extemporaneous. I wrote something, but that makes it hard for me to actually just talk. But this is my experiment. So I wanted to engage you guys through YouTube about a book that I find interesting. So ultimately, if you want a copy of the book, I can arrange that. But I don't think that you guys are in a place to really read this book at this point, and it probably wouldn't be one of those that pops out at you on the shelf. But I figured what I could do instead is talk about it chapter by chapter, and then we can discuss it either through the notes or through Discord or whatever. So the book that I picked is called Recapture the Rapture. I found out about it through a podcast. It was this was like an interview with the author, whose name is Jamie Wheel. I chose it for this experiment because it's not something that you would be normally apt to read, like I said a minute ago, but specifically talks about self-renewal and self-improvement, but it also looks at that through the barrel of a pretty pessimistic culture. So the first chapter is just an introduction. So usually an introduction is pretty self-congratulatory type, but in this case it actually kind of lays out what the book is going to present, and that's what introductions are supposed to do. He also defines some terms that obviously he's going to come back to. So the first chapter was called Doomsday, and I'll get to what that means in a minute. So first, when he gets into his chapter, he's talking about the rapture. He's talking about how humans, I usually call us naked apes or navel-gazing apes, that humans naturally attempt to find some form of meaning. And often that meaning is derived from, whatever the culture is doing. So, and obviously this book does not really focus on humanity as a whole, because he's got a pretty specific target audience. So really he's talking about Western culture, right? Philosophers might call the first world, but that's a little bit racist. Anyway, but you kind of get my meaning, is he's talking about us as in the West, as in not necessarily white, but people who were raised with a Judeo-Christian background, that kind of thing. Since our species tends to look for meaning in just about everything, meaning 1.0 is what we sought from religion, in this case Abrahamic religions, which are all more or less death cults when you get right down to it. But meaning 1.0 was about atonement of sin. We sin, we atone from that sin, we're forgiven, we get to go to heaven. And that's meaning 1.0. And the rapture described there is, the second coming, or for the Jews, the first coming. It's that moment where there's a reckoning. And I would say that, and the author says that, really for the last millennia, even maybe a little bit longer than that, for those within our culture, we've kind of looked that way. And if you think about it, the Norse certainly had their end of times, or at least it was described as their end of times. And as I'm thinking about that example now, that may not work, because a lot of those Norse mythologies were written after Christianization of those cultures, so maybe that whole Ragnarok thing has nothing to do with... Anyway, that's a diversion. We're not going to go there. So, meaning 1.0 is basically the meaning of life is to live by the church, do the church stuff, pray, and be right with God. Our culture kind of poked some holes in that in about the mid-18th century, by way of the Age of Reason, right? Through science and through just general thoughts, we really kind of replaced that for a good portion of the population, because not very many people are going to church anymore. So meaning 1.0 does work for some, but for the others, meaning 2.0 is the one that is kind of capital L liberalism. It's capitalism. It's self-governance. It is democracy, right? So under meaning 2.0, the promise is not so much that you'll be saved from your sin. It's that if you work hard and you study and you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, that you'll be a success. And that's That's meaning 2.0. And the author, Wheel, unequivocally says that we've failed at both, that both meanings have been failed. And that's what he means by recapture the capture, because we've lost that. We've lost the driving force. We've lost meaning. So we're looking for meaning 3.0, and that's kind of the point of his book. He describes the 4 points that give each one of those meanings some heft, as it were, or just describes what they are. So they have a couple things in common. One is that the world is broken as we know it, either through sin or, under meaning 2.0, it's overconsumption. That there's an inflection point coming, or the end is nigh. In other words, so whether it's divine intervention or global warming or whatever, something is about to happen. When the inflection point comes, some, generally said we, by those that are believing in, or who are the rapturists in this situation. So when that inflection point comes, we'll be saved. So we'll be taken up into heaven, and or we'll be protected. His example, which made me laugh, was Atlas Shrugged in space. And the fourth point is, let's prepare for or speed up the sign. So the rapturists, the old 1.0 types, they're the ones that are kind of pushing for, the signs of the end, right? So those are the crazies that talk about that. The others are the ones that are preparing for, like Elon Musk trying to fly and create a colony on Mars. So those are the basic things that they have in common. As the first chapter goes on, the meaning of the term, or the reason why he called it Doomsday Preppers, is he talks partially about a TV show that was on National Geographic called Doomsday Preppers, and in that show you follow people around that are stockpiling MREs and fixing up their bunkers and stuff. A lot of those are religious types, and a lot of those are just waiting for the government to fail or whatever it is. Their end of times are generally tied up in either that meaning 1.0 or meaning 2.0, and when that inflection point comes, they need to have their stuff in gear just to be prepared for it, right? So that's what Doomsday Preppers, the show, was about. And then he gave another example, and he talked about the fact that there was a lot of people that actually watched that show. And some people watched it for entertainment value of making fun of people, and some people watched it for the entertainment value or for the educational value of, how do I do this? How do I prepare myself? He gives another example about this professor, whose name I don't remember right now, but he was an MIT professor who was asked to do like a TED-type talk to some people on Wall Street. And the guy says that he doesn't normally do those because he doesn't like doing them, but they were offering him an entire year's worth of his salary at MIT to come and do this, so why not do it, right? So he goes to the room, and he immediately assumes that it's the green room because it's him and 5 or 6 other guys. And because he's expecting to speak in front of a large audience. Well, it turns out that it's not the large audience, that the entire audience that was paying him so much money to come and talk were those 5 or 6 guys that are hedge fund managers. And they, talk about general stuff for a minute, but then it comes down to the main question that these guys were asking of this guy from MIT, and that was, and I'm going to read this, how do we maintain authority over our security forces after the event? And so the author, Wheel, goes into a little bit of unpacking of that particular sentence. But the bottom line is, clearly these are also doomsday preppers, right? So one of the problems with both of these meanings 1.0 and 2.0, that in both cases, it's not really taking into account the entirety of the human race. It's not looking at all 8 billion of us, right? It's looking at, less than 1% of us at best. If we hedged our bets on the fact that we're going to survive by going to Mars with Elon Musk, well, you're not going to get 8 billion people up there, right? And the Bible never promised to take everybody. I think the actual Bible says it's 144,000 people that are going to get raptured. So, that's certainly not all of us either. So the whole idea is that, both of these meanings is it's the select few get to survive. So in the book, what he does is he's calling to action a couple of different steps. So for part one is defining the apocalypse, which is really more, it sounds like it's more about just sort of looking in depth at meaning 2.0 and how it's failed, but then maybe trying to define what meaning 3.0 could be. Part two is called The Alchemist's Cookbook, in which the writer hopes to challenge us from what he's calling cultural analysis to design thinking. And I think that's interesting. So it's about, trying to define that. And then part three is ethical cult building, in which the author hopes that we'll find some way of evangelizing presumably his solutions. So that's the first chapter of a book that I'm sure is going to be, it's probably going to make all of you disagree with each other, and that's fine. I thought it was interesting. So I wanted to hear from you. What do you think about those meanings? And do you get what he's saying? I mean, basically, what I take away from it is that the meaning is, the reason why you get up every day, right? So back in the Middle Ages, the reason why you got up every day was because God put you here and you're supposed to do God's work, right? So that's meaning 1.0. Meaning 2.0 is, I have a passion for, or I have responsibilities for, or whatever it is that's getting you up and getting you going to the next step. And that is, that meaning is what my parents certainly lived for, because they fully believed that, you work hard and, you're compensated. And my generation was told that, just as your generation was told that. But, ultimately it hasn't necessarily worked. I mean, it has for me in the sense that I'm comfortable, finally. But I don't know that I don't think that my experience is universal by any stretch. So it would be interesting what you think about that. And it would also be interesting to get a perspective from you guys on what you think about that sort of doomsday concept, that inflection point, as he called it. When I was a kid, and I know I've told the story before, but I was convinced that, we were going to blow up. In 1981, 82, it seemed like every third movie was about either a purposeful or accidental nuclear war. And I was convinced that we were going to not make it through. I'd just climb up on the roof and let the flash take me first, right? I think that was when the cynicism of the belief that you would make it through a nuclear war, like in the 60s, I think people honestly believed that if you got under your desk, you would be able to survive a nuclear blast. Well, we know that that's not true, and it certainly wasn't true with the bombs that we had available in the 1980s. So, there's no making it through those. And, so I lived under that. But here's the thing: is my experience has been, there's been lots of end of world days, whether it's the religious one or the Mayan one or the ICBM one, but none of them ever happened. And ultimately what we are is a bunch of self-obsessed naked monkeys flying on a rock in space. And the reality is that chaos reigns, but we don't need to be nihilistic about that. I mean, we can choose to be. But I don't think we need to be nihilistic. I think we can discover what meaning 3.0 is, or what meaning 3.0 is for us, at least individually, so that we have a way of connecting to ourselves and to our immediate world, etc. Anyway, so that was the first video. It'll be interesting to see how this gets edited up. In any case, I hope that we can do this, and again, we can do it on we can discuss it on Discord. And if anybody wants a copy of the book, then I can make that happen. I looked to see if it was in the library, and it's not, or at least not on Overdrive. Anyway, I love you all, and I hope this comes out well. And I imagine that this time I'm going to look shifty-eyed, because sometimes I was reading and sometimes I wasn't, and I keep on forgetting to look at that little light that's on my webcam. But you know what? I'm more savvy than some. So, talk to you guys later. Bye.